Hi, everybody. Welcome to Breeders' Cup Focus 2020. I'm Dan Illman along with Mike Beer. And in this edition of BC Focus, we're going to take a look at the major contenders for the Breeders' Cup turf. Let's look at the top 10 contenders as ranked in the preliminary morning line or odds order made by DRF's Brad Free. The Europeans, as usual, Mike, expected to make a big impact on the Breeders' Cup turf. We'll talk a lot more about the European entrants on DRFTV as we creep closer to Breeders' Cup Saturday. Magical, Mogul, and Tarnawa are the three main protagonists from Europe. Let's briefly talk about them. Magical was second in the 2018 Breeders' Cup turf behind the sensational Enable, and she earned a 113 buyer that day. She's kept rolling along since then.
Yeah, she ran an excellent race in that Breeders' Cup a couple of years ago, Dan, as a 3-year-old filly, no less. Well, since then, she's only won 6 more Group 1 races, 3 Group 1 wins so far this year, a little bit of a trip last time in the Champion Stakes. I mean, she is so good as a racehorse, Dan, and it'd be nice to see her one more time back over here trying out the Breeders' Cup.
Tarnawa is another filly. She'll be taking on the boys from the Breeders' Cup turf. She's in career form right now. Her last 2 races, Group 1s in France, she won, and I thought she won pretty impressively.
I did too. She's looked really good, especially in her recent starts. I mean, she's won 5 out of her last 6, but it's the last 2 that really catch your attention. 2 major races over there. I don't know if she's going to, point for this race, Dan, or the filly and mare turf. I guess they're keeping their options open and will enter them both. But if she runs here, it feels like the 1.5 miles is right up her alley.
Mogul is the European with perhaps the most upside potential, a 3-year-old colt by the great Galileo, Group 1 winner in France last time out for Aidan O'Brien. Looks like a very dangerous contender.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he's an improving 3-year-old. These horses are always dangerous in races like this. We'll see if he comes over as well.
Now let's talk about the North American trained contenders, beginning with Channel Maker, who took the Joe Hirsch Turf Classic for the 2nd consecutive year. This horse is reborn in his last 2 starts, and I wonder if it has a lot to do with the ground. Let's watch his most recent race at Belmont, his 2nd victory in the Joe Hirsch Turf Classic. And Channel Maker, he's found his speed, and he just keeps grinding it out, Mike, but the softer the better for him.
Yeah, and he does really like some cut in the ground. Maybe he'll get that come Breeders' Cup Day. Really, the key to this horse is whether or not he can make the lead. It certainly seems that way, Dan. His last 2 races, he was able to get to the top right out of the gate, and it just really makes a big difference in his form. When he can make the lead, he's very, very tough to run down, and when he can't, it just seems like maybe he's a bit of a different horse. Going to come into the Breeders' Cup off of back-to-back 108 buyers.
From Southern California comes United, who is able to make the front, as he did in this race, the John Henry Turf Championship, where he was able to get to the fronts at a very rated pace as the odds-on favorite. And then as an odds-on favorite should, when given that pace scenario, sprints right on home. He's also very capable from off of the pace. I think there are a lot of folks that are going to see his slates of G2s since last year's Breeders' Cup Turf, where he was a good second behind a very nice horse in Bricks and Mortar. And they might say, this horse might be a bit class compromised. I would warn them. I think he's a lot better than people give him credit for.
Yeah, well, listen, I think, basically you could look at all of our turf horses going 1.5 miles in races like this and think they're class compromised against any good Europeans that show up. So we'll see who shows up. United is he's a rock solid horse. I can't say I'm his biggest fan, but he ran really well in this race last year, and he's going to come into this race in pretty good form.
You want to talk about consistent horses. That's Zulu Alpha. He and Arklow exit the same race at Kentucky Downs. And I wonder if the ground was very soft going in the Kentucky Turf Cup worked against Zulu Alpha. Let's watch that race right now. Arklow, I guess, Mike, the best thing to say, he's just been a little bit of an in and outer this year.
Yeah, it did feel like he was, maybe headed the wrong way as a 6-year-old this year. The blinkers went on for this race. And it does sort of feel like that made a difference, Dan. He got himself involved in the action much earlier, and he actually stays on very strongly through the stretch here. This is a clear-cut win for a horse who, listen, he was a good horse as a 5-year-old. It felt like it just took him a while to come around this year. He took a huge step forward in that race. And Zulu Alpha now it feels like he's maybe in a little bit of the position where, really, really good towards the end of last year and earlier this year. He got a little bit of a layoff. Now he needs to refine that really good form.
Taking a look at the rest of the list, we have Red King from Southern California, who has beaten United this year, but likely is going to have to run a career best if he is to upset the turf. Aquaphobia is a very likable horse. We remember him from bouncing around the optional claiming and listed ranks. He has really improved in his last few races, but I think the feeling is the North American-based runners probably have to step it up a little bit if they're going to compete with their European contemporaries.
Oh yeah, that's always the case for sure. I mean, when you look at a horse like Aquaphobia, and he has improved, but you know, when you see horses like him in a race like this, you sort of realize why the Europeans are very tough come Breeders' Cup Day, because Aquaphobia is just not supposed to be able to beat horses like that. Red King, he wants to go long. I can say that about him, Dan. I don't know how well he really fits in a race like this, though.
Is Channel Maker for real? Is his last two races just a sign that this horse is seeing dead red right now? I mean, the Joe horse was actually on a firm turf course, and he was able to make the lead. Or do you just go over his overall body of work and say he's a very, very nice horse? He's in good form right now, but it's hard to imagine him taking down Magical if the Magical we saw against Enable 2 years ago shows up.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he is a really nice horse. And listen, it's not like his last two races have come out of nowhere, Dan. He's been a good horse for a long time. But they've also run him in the Breeders' Cup the last 2 years, and he was nowhere in those races. So it just feels like, you know, when you get him in the right situation against the right field, he can be very, very tough.
Quick thoughts on Zulu Alpha, who's been near the top of the list of North American-based turf runners since the beginning of the year. He's had a really consistent and hard-knocking campaign, and I just think a lot of people might be forgetting about this horse. He just seems to show up every time, and he has that kind of tactical position to work out a trip.
Yeah, that I do like that about him. You know, he's going to be interesting come Breeders' Cup Day. I don't know, Dan, if the good Europeans show up, if he's really good enough to beat them. But I will say this: they ran him in the Breeders' Cup last year at Santa Anita. He wound up finishing fourth. He ran a lot better than it looks that day. He had an almost impossible trip that day. You know, his recent form doesn't thrill me, but if he can somehow find his way back to the top of his game, he could be very dangerous.
But as of right now, it's the European M&Ms, Magical and Mogul, 5-2 and 7-2 respectively on DRF's Bradfree very preliminary morning line for the Breeders' Cup Turf. They're the leaders for the Breeders' Cup Turf. We'll see if Channel Maker, Zulu Alpha, maybe even a horse like Red King or Aquaphobia can take the necessary step forward.